Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. I know how you all like my stories about Otherworld, my otherworldly encounters. So I thought I'd tell you a story today about the time I saw a shuck. Now, if you're English and you're into folklore, you probably know what a shuck is. Also known as Black Shuck, Old Shuck. It's an Old English word for a fiend or a devil or a terrifier. Shuck means to terrify. And sometimes they're known as devil dogs, black dogs, that sort of thing. But they can come sort of in other forms. They can be smaller. They're not big. They don't not like a werewolf or anything. And they're particular to East Anglia, Norfolk and Suffolk. But I saw mine in South Oxfordshire, so they're clearly all about the place. So I'm going to tell you today about a few years ago when I saw Black Shuck. So I was on my way to walk my dog. And where we lived at the time, um, we backed onto a field, but you couldn't get to the field behind our house without going out the front of our house and walking down the road and then down another little lane. Now, the little lane you had to walk down was a very, very ancient road. It was an ancient trackway that led to an old priory. That was now a private house, a medieval priory. But if you know anything about medieval and early Tudor buildings, monastic buildings in Britain, they tended to build them on older sacred sites. They like to build them on sort of standing stone circles, that sort of thing, almost to claim the the righteousness in being the true religion, but also to stop people worshipping at them still, So this track ran down to a lane called Elvenden Road, and Elvenden in Anglo-Saxon means Valley of the Elves. Now, not only does that mean that that road was Anglo-Saxon or used by Anglo-Saxons, the fact that they named it, and that area still kept that name, but also Anglo-Saxons tended to refer to areas as being elven or used by elves when they were actually finding evidence, earthworks, dwellings, whatever, ruins of earlier inhabitation, not Roman, because the Anglo-Saxons knew what Roman buildings look like. So you're talking older than that. So when they were finding remains of, Bronze Age hill forts, or if they were finding, Neolithic passage burials and this sort of thing, they would say, oh, that's where the elves live. And so you often find that these places have a name that is of the elves. So the fact that this road was called Elvenden means that the Anglo-Saxons had got there and gone, oh, there's some like ancient buildings here or ancient dwellings or whatever. So, whilst there was no standing stones or anything there now, there was some sort of hill fort type earthworks on that hill that aren't on a map, but local people knew about. And there was this monastic building. So it was very, very likely that this priory had been built on what was some sort of sacred site, Bronze Age or older. And that was the lane that I had to walk down. So we're talking about a really ancient trackway. But I walked this way all the time, and it was never spooky or had a weird atmosphere or anything like that. It was beautiful. So I was walking down this trackway, and to get to the lane behind my house, the field behind my house, I had to take a right down another little track. Now, This was a very ancient road as well, but it was much less well used. Now, this track did have a weird feeling about it. I often hurried through there. It was only maybe 20, 25 meters long, not very long at all before you got to the threshold of the field, the entrance to the field. And interestingly, the entrance to the field was marked with a big flat stone in the ground, like there had been some sort of gateway there. So it was like a liminal threshold place. And it did have a weird feeling, this little extra lane that we had to go down to get to the backfield. But, it was a normal day. There hadn't been much otherworld activity. I wasn't really thinking about otherworld. So it definitely wasn't, I wasn't having one of those days at all. It was just a lovely dry day, and I was walking the dogs down this lane, and then I took a right down the weird little dark lane that was very short, and I could see the entrance to the field and wasn't feeling spooked out in the slightest. And then I got halfway down this 25-meter lane and everything changed. Not visibly, but the energy changed. The air became thick. It was almost like being underwater. It was like when you were walking, there was a resistance in the air, like if you were walking in water. It's very difficult to describe. And everything sort of slowed down. The air became so viscous that it was almost difficult to breathe. You didn't feel like you were getting enough air. It was almost like you wanted to gasp. It was really strange. And both the dogs stopped and sort of became hyper alert. To the point where I actually thought, is there a man in the bushes? I was actually worried at that point that my intuition was telling me that there was a danger. There was a danger, like a physical danger. So, I stopped dead and was looking around me, thinking, is there someone hiding in the bushes? Because the dogs were reacting like there could have been. And so I couldn't see anyone. So I thought, well, that's a bit odd, you know. So I carried on walking, and I only had by this point, maybe about 10 meters to get to this flat stone where you got to go into the back field. And this feeling got worse and worse and worse as I carried on walking. And I was hyper aware, looking around me, looking to see if I could see anybody hiding. And then I got to this stone where it marked like a physical threshold into the back field, and the back field was enormous and it was open, and they had, where they didn't want people to go off the public footpath, they had planted probably a road's width apart, a British road's width apart, not like a freeway in America, but like two cars width they could pass apart, saplings of hedge trees, so hawthorn, blackthorn, buckthorn, that sort of thing. But they were still quite young. They hadn't spread out, they hadn't thickened, they hadn't joined together, and they were in their plastic sheets. They're, the ones they wrap them in to stop the deer eating them. And so they were spotted down, and you could see them going up and over all the way into the distance, far, far distance, probably about half a mile. And this feeling had got worse and worse and worse. And as I crossed the stone threshold, the dogs stopped again. I didn't look down to look at them, but normally they would have gone tearing off into the field. And they didn't. And they stopped. And as I looked up, I could see what looked like a black dog, probably a bit smaller than a Labrador, walking across ways. So this I could see these hedges, these trees going down into the distance, and it walked across. So it came across, through one across the field and then in front of me, probably about 20 meters in front of me, through these dotted saplings of hedge trees, across the trackway that was 2 cars wide and just grass. And it was a clear day, I could see really clearly. It came across it and then went to cross the saplings on the other side. But what was odd was that it was a sunny day and there was no definition to this black dog. There was no sunlight catching its fur, no glistening, no texture. It was just black, like a void. There was no discernible texture at all. And almost like it was just like a cutout of the world. It was the blackest black where nothing reflected off of it. And but it was clearly moving and walking, and it walked like a dog. And but the only thing that was strange about the way it walked was that it sort of elongated its steps. So, dogs have quite upright shoulder joints and hip joints. So when they walk, it's quite contained, the movement, except when they're running. But the walking movement of this black dog was it stretched out. So the front legs when it walked stretched out like it was running, like they were much more elongated, much more stretched. It was quite an unnatural movement. Um, and so that and the no texture and the no light reflecting off it and it just being like a void of black, that's what really got my attention. And also, there was still this feeling of complete dread. Of being underwater, of time slowing down, of the air being thick. Just my whole body, all my intuition was just telling me there's something really wrong. Um, and so I watched this walk across the track, and then it went through the saplings on the other side. So I'd had a really good view of it, and it was really quite close as well. And as I stepped through a bit more into the sunshine from where I'd been in the other wooded track, and I passed through in fully into the back field, I looked again to see where it was coming out because I was fully expecting to see it coming out the other side of the hedge and carrying on walking. And it wasn't there. It wasn't there. There was no sign of it. And I walked closer and closer, and there was, I could see miles in the distance, and it was gone. There was no sign of it whatsoever. It couldn't have gone anywhere that I would not have seen it. And it was then I realized the dogs weren't with me, which is also weird because if they'd seen another dog and they were off the lead in the back field, they normally would have gone charging up to say hello unless I told them not to. And they were still rooted to the spot back where I had stopped on the threshold stone. And as I turned round to see where on earth they were, I could see, even from, a couple of meters away where I was, that all their heckles were up. So much so that they looked like a couple of wild boars. We had a black Labrador at the time. One of them was a black Labrador, and if he put his heckles up because his coat was so smooth and fine, it was really obvious. And I had never seen him with his heckles like they were. I mean, he had this ridge along his back that was so large that he looked like a wild boar. And they were both just planted to the spot. And I think they just knew that something was really, really wrong. And as soon as I started moving again to really have a really good look to see if this thing I had seen, this dog I had seen, had escaped anywhere. And I sort of really was satisfied that there was nowhere it could have gone. It had actually disappeared. Um, and then I looked at the direction it had come in. I had a little look. I was like, well, where did that come from? What was it walking on? And it was walking, the line it had taken was a line in the field that was worn down like a little groove. It was probably maybe a meter wide, and it was worn in a groove all the way down into some woodland, a way off, hundreds of meters away. And I had always looked at this groove previously and thought that looks like an old trackway or an old drover's road or something. And there was lots of those sorts of things around where we lived, lots of drover's roads and things that were, had obviously been disused for a really long time. And so the route it had taken was an ancient trackway. It had crossed an ancient trackway, and it had changed the whole atmosphere when it had suddenly appeared and walked across and then disappeared again. And it had this horrific feeling of like wrongness, like it shouldn't have been there, or I shouldn't have been there. It was the only way I could describe it, was like being in completely the wrong place and time. It was a feeling of not being where I should be. It was like I was fundamentally, at a cellular level, somewhere I should not be, is the best way to describe it. And the only conclusion that I could come to was that it was a shuck, which some people call a hell hound, but it didn't really come across as scary. It didn't acknowledge me. It didn't do anything aggressive. It was just, it just walked across in front of me, but it was just accompanied by this feeling of horror and dread and something being really wrong. But that was bodily in me. That was my body responding to this wrongness. And so I don't fundamentally think the shuck that I saw was scary or was dark or horrible. I think it was just an otherworld being that was either out of place or I was out of place somehow and not where I should have been and had seen it. But te I could see why people call them the terrifier, but in themselves, they are not terrifying. It's your body's response to seeing it that makes you feel that sort of feeling, if you see what I mean. But that's no fault of the thing, the shuck, is it? If you frighten me, it's not your fault unless you've done that on purpose. And this thing definitely had not done this on purpose. But what was interesting is that before I'd even seen it, my body was feeling the effects of being in its presence. So, I was probably 20 meters, 30 meters, and hadn't even seen it yet, wasn't even aware it was there, but had still picked up time slowing down, air thickening, not getting enough air in the lungs, the dogs being frightened. So it'd be really interesting and to hear your theories about what you thought I experienced that day when I saw the shuck. Do you think that I had gone into a different dimension or a different timeline? And that's why I was feeling strange and experiencing the environment differently? Or do you think that that was my senses going on overdrive to tell me, to warn me that there was something really unusual up ahead. It's interesting, isn't it? So let me know what you think in the comments. And I hope you enjoyed the story of the time I saw the shuck.